All right, so I scheduled chapter 14 for this week. It's evaluating the results section. So the results section is one of the final sections in a journal article. You don't have to do this section for your final paper because you're not going to actually run your study. You're just going to propose a study, but it's still important that you understand how to do this section of a research paper or an article. And so some of the chapters in this book are pretty long. Some of them are very short. The results section chapter is very short. It's just a few pages long. And you know, I think that um, I think that as we begin to look at our results, let's say you have your model and you propose a study, and that's the end of your paper, basically, other than the conclusion. But um, the let's say you send it in and you get a grant to actually try this out, and you run your study and you get all these results. Um, you want to be able to look at those results in two different ways. So the first way is presenting accurate statistics on the results that you found. And those statistics should show whether your model is working or not, at least for the sample you used. Um, and by working, I mean, is it helping people? That's the whole goal of this. Will your model make a positive difference in the lives of other people? And you know, I think that usually like the easiest way, like we talked about, using your measurements is, pre-test, post-test, so that we can see if there's been any improvement. It's in whatever you're trying to resolve, whether it's anxiety or depression or whatever it might be. So remember, there's two different types of statistical analysis that are possible, at least for this. And so you have the quantitative, and you're going to basically present the numbers. But there's also the qualitative, okay? Qualitative you present in a little different way because, yes, there are computer programs that will analyze the transcriptions of all of the hours of interviews that you do. And, uh, those transcriptions are analyzed. What are the themes that every person brought up, or do they differ? Are things repeated? Have people remembered or experienced similar things or similar solutions? Um, so you'll give the results from the computer analysis of those transcriptions from the interview. But you're also going to be reading the transcriptions and listening to these interviews that are recorded again yourself. And the one thing I like about the presentation of qualitative data is that you can show a statistic like, okay, so remember the example I gave that this town had a flood, and my professor went and interviewed people, and their life timeline was changed as a result of that flood. And they referred to things in their life either, oh, that happened before the flood, or that happened after the flood. So it became a line of demarcation in their lives, a reference point in time. And so let's say they found that theme, and what they would do is they would present the statistical number from the program. Okay, 95% of people referred to this as a marker in their lives. This traumatic event became a marker on the timeline of their life journey. But then, because you have all the transcriptions, you can find examples of what people actually said about that. And you can give examples from the transcription in quotes under each statistical result. That's a nice thing about qualitative studies, that you could give examples of what people actually said. The quantitative statistics, you can talk about the findings, but there's really not a lot of quotes or interesting things that you can read as a result. I kind of like the human interest aspect of the qualitative answers. So I guess the third possibility is to have a mixture of the two, to use your measurements before and after, but then also maybe ask some questions, is there one question I always ask, is there anything you'd like to share that this assessment didn't ask about? It's kind of like a catch-all, and you can publish those. So that's the first type of result you're going to write about if you ran a study. The second part, which is even more interesting, is, okay, you've got these numbers, you've got these quotes, whatever it might be. You've got the statistical results. But the second thing is you get to interpret these results. Like, for instance, since you were present, during this whole process, are there variables that maybe you didn't consider that you discovered as you were going through this process, as you were using your model with this sample of individuals? Did anything surprise you? Did anything happen that wasn't expected? Were the results as expected or hoped for, or are they totally different? Did one aspect of the results, so maybe 3 questions out of the assessment, stood out that maybe a larger portion of the sample said that they saw improvement in those 3 questions than the rest of the questions on the assessment? So if it's like a 5-point Likert scale, did you see improvement? None, neutral, or yeah, a lot, maybe 3 questions got 5s and all the rest got 3s and 4s. So what's different about those questions in the assessment? Why did this model help those individuals to a greater degree than, the other aspects of the inventory? So see if there's any themes in the questions. Maybe it's the opposite. Maybe there were 2 or 3 questions that it didn't help people as much. Well, what's different about those questions? And that would say, oh, I need to improve something about this model, about this treatment model, to address these 3 questions that scored lower than the rest of the questions in the inventory. So it's these little things that I think people find interesting. It's not just presenting the broad results. You really have to look at, okay, well, were there any differences in the answers, or did it just work across the board? Or maybe it didn't, But the real question is, in your interpretation section, is why didn't it work? Or why did it work for certain questions and not other assessment points? So I think that's the interpretation part is really kind of an interesting aspect. So let's talk about ways to present this data so that people can better understand it. And that's basically called descriptive statistics, finding out basically what the best graphical representation of the data would be. How am I going to help people understand this data easily? And that's usually done through tables and charts. And we can just talk about a few of the different ones, and you can usually see some of the different types in the dissertation sample I gave you. There's a lot of different ones in there. And yeah, I just want to give you some examples. So, a table is good for things like, uh, representing how is your sample distributed? How did you choose your sample? And then maybe presenting what type of individuals, like were they male, female, whatever you chose as variables, but um, you know, how many responded? So for instance, I have a table that shows how many males and females did not reply by state. So remember, I tried to get 2 males and 2 females for every state in the country for this old study. And interestingly enough, I had a lot more missing females than males in my responses. So I'm not sure why that was, but you know. Um, the I think that usually you want to present some basic statistics about things like age, you know. So you're going to get some basic generalized data, and so it might show the age of the people who participated in your study or who were treated. If you did go to different cities, different school districts, different parts of the country, so different states, you could show data from the different states or different parts of the country or different counties within Pennsylvania or different cities. You can show, if you're looking at a profession, how long individuals had worked in a profession. So for instance, let's say you wanted to study counselors. Well, it might make a big difference if you show how many years they worked in the profession. So for instance, maybe you want to measure how to treat burnout. Well, the number of years in the profession would really make a big difference. The you're going to kind of give the results of each instrument that you use. So if you use Beck's depression inventory and Beck's anxiety inventory, you'll show the results. It might be able to break it down by question. So if it's a short inventory, you could look at basically what those questions were, and you can get some data on each question. Let's see. So sometimes you're going to ask about education. Did people have high school? Did they have college? Did they have graduate school? And so different kinds of charts are good for different types of data. So if you're looking at numbers, you might use a bar chart or a table, um, like I showed. But if you're looking at percentages, a lot of times a pie chart works really well because it gives you a nice graphical representation of the percentage of individuals that displayed whatever you're trying to represent. You might look at what's the counseling training that individuals had. Well, some might have no training, some might have a degree, some might have, some other type of training. Maybe they went to workshops or conferences or something like that. Um, let's see. Uh, you could, if you want to look at certain questions, you can either use a table, a bar chart, or um, you know, you could, if you wanted to compare two things, sometimes, you might want to show frequency and kind of two lines moving across the frequency, and you can compare those two lines. Um, bars, if you want to show that one was much higher than another or one was much lower than another, it's a nice graphical representation. Bar charts. I'm not sure if I used a scatter plot or not. But that kind of gives you an example. I also followed up the measurements with some basic questions, and you can provide quotes at the end from the additional questions if you want. That's always interesting to read. And I think it's okay to actually share your thoughts on the entire experience and process as well. You're invested in this. You went through the entire process. Uh, and did you learn something from this process? Would you have done it differently knowing what you know now? Would you change it next time? Uh, so all of these things are important. So it's okay to give your personal reaction and thoughts at the end. Maybe you wish you had done something differently. Maybe you would change your model slightly as a result of your findings to address some of the things you found or didn't find. So that's the whole purpose of this, to, make positive changes, to improve the model. Or if it didn't work, to admit that. So, like I said, you're probably not going to run a study or this study, but if you ever do, these are the basic things to include. Gonna make sure I didn't miss anything from the book. I don't think I did. No. Like I said, the book was only like 5 or 6 pages long, but tried to give you some basic examples of some of the ways to present the data, just in general descriptive stats. Um, it does matter how you present it because people rarely misconstrue the actual numbers. Like, if they're giving numbers to the news or if it's in a commercial or something like that, the numbers are usually accurate. But what they do uh, is they'll say, oh, the average, But remember, there's three kinds of average. Well, which one is most appropriate for representing the data? Is it mean? Is it median? Is it mode? A lot of times you can change the way people perceive data by which chart you use, by which graphical representation you use. So, you know, I think all of that is important. Yeah. So that's pretty much it with the chapter.